Let's get going. Chapter 19, legal descriptions and deeds. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the three methods of describing real property, those three forms of legal descriptions. We're going to identify the four types of deeds that are used in New Jersey. We're going to learn about the anatomy of a deed. And let's start off with legal descriptions. What is a legal description of land? Well, it's a way of describing real property in a contract, deed, mortgage, or other document that's acceptable in a court of law. And a legal description can be combined or altered only by a competent title attorney or a surveyor. The deed is the document that's used to transfer the ownership of real property or one's rights, title, or interest in partial ownership interest in real property. So deeds must include an adequate description of the land that is being conveyed or the right or what have you that is being conveyed. Now, deeds are not proof of ownership, but they are the documents that are used to transfer it. Now, we're going to start off first not talking about the deeds, but talking about the three legal descriptions of land. And they are metes and bounds, the rectangular survey, also known as the government survey system, or the PLSS survey, public land survey system, but we're not going to mention that on exams. It'll probably be rectangular or government survey option. And a plat map, which is a map of a subdivision recorded in a county where the land is located. So if you haven't done so already, highlight land can be described by three methods: metes and bounds, government survey, or a plat map.
Got it. Yeah.
So I got this slide put together for you here. First, these things aren't going to be mentioned for a couple of pages. We just got the legal descriptions first, but I think we should go over these first and then the legal description. So what is a benchmark? A benchmark is a local permanent marker that aids surveyors in their measurements, which could be based on these markers rather than the actual benchmark, which could be many, many miles away. A datum is a point, line, or surface from which elevation is measured. And the means zero elevation point is the mean sea level in New York Harbor. That's the average, not counting, storms and such where the sea levels would rise. So whatever the average, if you discount those outliers, whatever the average sea level is in New York Harbor, that is zero datum. That's zero elevation. So all over the United States, elevation is based on the sea level in New York Harbor. So we have local benchmarks, these markers that could be locally, instead of having a surveyor have to go all the way back to New York Harbor and then work their way back doing measurements all the way back, excuse me, to wherever it is that they're measuring their land. In New Jersey, for instance, they don't have to start off in New York Harbor and then work their way all the way back here. At some point they did, and then they just put a local marker that says that as of this point, you're at what elevation, and then they work their way from that marker rather than from New York Harbor. So they don't have to do that over and over again. A monument is a marker that we put at each of the corners of the property. It can be made of wood, rebar, what have you. Monuments are the markers that the surveyors lay down or put in the ground that mark the corners of your property, the boundaries. So a marker could be wood, steel stakes, or it could be a ribbon, like they pin it to a tree. And, they're not going to pound a steel stake into a tree just to show you that your corner of your property is in the middle of the tree where the tree's standing. So they'll just pin a marker to it like that, a ribbon. So benchmarks, those are those permanent local markers that aid surveyors in their measurements. Datum is a measurement of elevation, and zero elevation is defined as the mean sea level at New York Harbor, according to the USGS. That's the United States Geological Survey, which is a department of our government. The USGS. If you guys ever see the radar maps when they show the weather on the news, a lot of times it'll have that USGS logo on it. That's the United States Geological Survey. That's a department of our government that monitors our planet, from everything from seismic activity to tidal waves to they monitor our planet for the weather from outer space, to see if asteroids are coming, all that stuff. They monitor our planet. The three legal descriptions of land, metes and bounds. Let's start off with that one. A metes and bounds legal description is a measurement of distance and direction around your property's boundaries. And it's only used in the 13 original states, New Jersey being one of them. The point at which that measurement begins around your property, they got to pick one of the corners where they start their measurement, is referred to as the POB, which is short for point of beginning. That's the point of beginning where the surveyor begins their measurement around your property's boundaries. Now, it doesn't matter if they go clockwise or counterclockwise. It's just whatever point that they start their measurement at, whether they go clockwise or counterclockwise, they have to note that on the survey and then just continue in that direction until they close the loop all the way around the property. The rectangular survey system, also known as the government survey, is not used in New Jersey or any of the 13 original states. It's only used in the western states. It was created by Congress in 1785. See, the metes and bounds system is an older system. They used to use that in Europe as well. The rectangular government survey is a survey system that they use for western states, anything but the 13 original colonies, the 13 original states. It's a measurement that locates land using principal meridians and baselines by degrees of latitude and longitude. And to find areas, sections of land, areas of land they call townships, which are 36 miles squared, and sections within the township, which are 1 mile square. Okay, when we talk about surveys and we use the word township, we're not talking about Edison Township, Woodbridge Township. Those are forms of municipalities used to manage the local municipality. Those are forms of government. When we talk about surveys and we use the word township, it's actually a unit of measure. It's 36 miles squared. All right. Now, or 36 square miles, 6 miles squared. So the plat map is a map of a subdivision that indicates the boundaries of an individual property. And that's usually for those subdivisions there. And it's recorded in the county where the land is located. All right. Let's see. Each lot has a designated by a lot and block number on the map. And it's often combined with the metes and bounds description to measure property, at least here in New Jersey it is. So here's some examples of surveyor benchmarks, what they may look like. It could be a sign like this. They could be these kinds of markers that are then embedded in rock, stone, what have you. You could find these maybe hiking in the woods somewhere out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, or on a mountaintop. You could find these embedded in embedded in rock. These have been used by surveyors for hundreds of years. As you can see, look at this one. This one was put there in 1882. They're just resetting this one from, what's this, New York, the Adirondacks. So in 1882, I guess that one rotted out, so now they're replacing the marker. This one's from 1933. They got them set all over the United States. Here's a couple more. Here's one right in a brick. Here's one in a stone set in 1890. You see? Even Disney got their own survey markers. Or they could look like this. All right. So here's an old team of surveyors before photography even got good. Look at this guy, he's almost disappeared. So here's some surveyor tools that they've been using over the ages before they started using these scopes like that. You'd have a team of surveyors that use a chain, and they'd stretch out that chain, and a chain is a particular length. It's either 33 feet or 66 feet in length, and they would specify when they're doing their surveys what type chain they were using. And then they would do their measurements, and they would say, quote, so many chains for the distance. And each chain would either be 33 feet or 66 feet. And then you got your compass, where then they could do their measurement of distance and direction in a certain area. And this is how they measured out the entire United States and measured the boundaries of territories and people's land and state boundaries and such. Today, they have more advanced tools with lasers and GPS, but they have to go over those measurements periodically, and they do. And these tools and these surveyors were actually very accurate with these rudimentary tools that they used way back when. All right. So once again, benchmarks, data, monuments, we got the meets and bounds, the point of beginning, the rectangular government survey, and the plat map. So meets and bounds is a measurement of distance and direction around the property's boundaries. The measurement begins and ends at a designated point of beginning. That's the point where the surveyor begins their measurement around the property's boundaries. The surveyor's measurement can be proceed clockwise or counterclockwise, as long as they know which direction it's going. And then they could have that measurement all around the property's boundaries, and must continue in that direction until the loop is closed and ends at a point of beginning where it started. Monuments are used to establish real estate boundaries, and surveyor stakes or ribbons are pounded into the ground or into a tree to show the where exactly the corners of your property are. So now you can visually see it. It's one thing to have a surveyor draw a map and say, here's your property, but now you take that map and you go out to the land and trying to find those points is another thing if you don't know how to do the measurements, which the surveyor does. So you could pay the surveyor an extra fee to put these stakes in the ground at each of the corners of your property. And now you could tie a string around each one of those, and you could visually see where your property line is. So it's important to get these surveys done anytime you do any construction, you build a fence, you do anything like that to make sure it's on your property. So the real estate agent should always advise their client that when they order those surveys, usually their attorney does it, but the real estate agent could, or the property buyer could. It's important that when they order those surveys, that you tell them to, pay the surveyor the extra fee and find out how much they charge for it to pound those stakes in the ground, because at some point they're going to need to know them, need to know where their property boundaries are. And when they get that survey done, the surveyor would bang those stakes in the ground, and then they would just put the steel ones, that bang them hard enough that they go below the surface of the ground. And if they ever need them, they just pull them up so that they can see where they are. And then they just pound them back down into the ground and leave them there. At least that's when they're made of the rebar. So let's highlight the meets and bounds description and the point of beginning. And monuments are those fixed objects to mark your corners of your property there.
Got it.
You can see they even give you like a description of the way that it could be worded. I have a survey. I thought I had it in here. I may have it down in my briefcase, but I had a survey that I was going to read off to you from an old property that my father used to have. But anyway, let's read this one. It says, a tract of land located in the township of Kingston, County of Burlington, New Jersey, state of New Jersey, may be described as follows. Beginning at the intersection of the east line of Jones Road and the south line of Skull Drive, thence east along the south line of Skull Drive 200 feet, thence south 15 degrees east to 16.5 feet, more or less, to the center thread of Red Skull Creek, thence northwesternly along the center line of said creek to the intersection with the eastern line of Jones Road, thence north 105 feet, more or less, along the east line of Jones Road to the place of beginning. Okay, that's the way you could hear how a survey would be read, and reading this and seeing a map of it, it's not so easy to actually find where your property boundaries are. So paying them that extra fee to bang those stakes in the ground, I've seen them charge anywhere from $50 to $475 for each one of the markers that we call monuments that they bang into each of the corners of the property. Now remember, not all properties have four corners, some are irregular shaped. So, trying to get one that charges, find out what their charges are before you pay for them to get the survey, and then they can maybe get the survey done from a different surveyor if they're a ripoff, Don't just go with the one that the attorney suggests. All right, now we just got the slide once again with the legal descriptions. If you guys haven't done it, you should take a picture of this slide to study these things. Benchmark, datum, monument, meets and bounds, point of beginning, rectangular or government survey. It has townships and sections and a plat map. Which legal description of land is used in Western states?
Rectangular survey or the government survey?
The rectangular or government survey. Which legal description of land is not used in the 13 original states or colonies?
Him answer, I guess, because we use meets and bounds, no?
Yeah. I'm just trying to show you guys the different ways they could be asking questions on exams. Which legal description of land is used only in the 13 original states?
Meets and bounds.
Meets and bounds. What legal description of land starts at a definite designated point called the POB? Meets and bounds. What legal description of land was created by Congress?
Meets and bounds.
Rectangular or government survey. Which legal description of land uses areas called townships and sections that are separated by degrees of latitude and longitude? Rectangular government survey. So which legal description of land points out the location and boundaries of each of the individual lots?
The plat map.
The plat map. There we go. So the rectangular survey, also known as the government survey or sometimes the public land survey system, is based on the principal meridians and baselines. The ones that sea captains and airline pilots use. Remember those invisible lines on the globes in your classrooms growing up, right? Those are those invisible lines, the principal meridians and baselines. And they're separated by degrees of latitude and longitude all around the planet. And they use those coordinates to locate areas of land they call townships. And townships are 36 square miles in size. And every township contains sections, which are consecutively numbered 1 through 36. And each one of these sections are 1 mile, 1 mile square in size. Section 16s are usually reserved for schools and 14 for government usage. So the rectangular survey system, let's highlight, sometimes called the government survey method, was established by Congress in 1785 as early pioneers moved westward. And this method of describing real property is not used in New Jersey or any of the other 13 original states.
Got it.
And they go on to give you a description saying that anytime you hear the term township and it's related to survey, they're talking about township being a unit of measure, because we also know townships as being like a reference to a type of municipality to run the local government. Okay, those are two different things. This does not mean that like Edison Township is 36 miles square, 36 square miles. Okay, the two things are not related. One is a way to manage government, another is just a unit of measure. Okay. So in this description here on page 353, you can see highlight township. Each township is 36 square miles. A section is a township is further divided into 36 numbered sections. Each section contains 1 square mile. And you can see how they're numbered. It starts from the top right, and then they'll be, you read them to the left, and then the right, and left, and right, left, right, just like the military. Left, right, left. Okay. So remember they said 16 and 14, these are usually reserved for government and for schools. So each township, this is a township here. How do I know it's a township? Because it's got 36 squares within it. It's 36 square miles. Each one of these numbered squares is a square mile. Now they give you a description here that if you ever read something like this, the SE quarter of the SE quarter of the SE quarter of section 1 is 10 acres in size. Okay, that is a description of the government survey, the rectangular or government survey. Here, let me show you. Okay, so here's that section. We just zoomed in on that township with the different sections in it. And if you pick one of these sections where your property is located, so townships are numbered too. Okay, but let's just say that you're within this township with whatever number it is, and then you're in one of these sections. Okay, let's zoom in on one of those sections. If you see a legal description that reads like this, the SE quarter of the SE quarter of the SE quarter is 10 acres in size, just picture this square, right? And quarter it. You draw a cross right through it, right? And this is the southeast quarter, then quarter that of the southeast quarter, and then quarter that of the southeast quarter, which is 10 acres in size. You see how we got to that? We quartered this, and then we took this square and we quartered that, and then we took this square and then we quartered that. So that's the southeast quarter of the southeast quarter of the southeast quarter, which is 10 acres in size. If you see a measurement that reads like that, we're talking about the government or rectangular survey. I showed you how the definition of a meets and bounds survey would read. It could say going along the road or in this direction for such a distance. Okay, this is a different measurement. And they locate these townships and sections by using principal meridians and baselines. If you remember the planet, we have the globe, we have the each of these invisible lines are separated by degrees of latitude and longitude, right? And that's how you could plot out the whole planet. And once again, we got the three legal descriptions of land. So the rectangular government survey is a measurement that locates the land using principal meridians and baselines measured by degrees of latitude and longitude to find areas of land called townships. How big is a township? 36 square miles. How many sections in a township? 36, because each one is 1 square mile. And there's 640 acres in 1 mile. Not that you need to know that, but there you go. But there are some numbers you need to know. How many feet in an acre? You guys recall that one?
43,660.
560.
560.
43,560.
560.
All right, so the plat is a map of a subdivision to locate individual properties by lot and block number and combines the meets and bounds measurement of each individual property's boundaries. The description of land designated by lot and block number in order to be located on the map. Plat map of a subdivision is the land is divided into blocks and lots and indicates streets, access roads, etc. for public use. A subdivision plat for a condominium description, each unit references also elevation, because if you were to just look at a flat map, it looks like multiple properties are located at the same exact location. So you have to add another measurement, which would then measure the elevation where your property starts and where it ends, if it's on the second or third floor or what have you, right? Those maps need to be in 3D, 3D. All right, so here's one example of a plat map that would be in the book. And let's do the highlight over here on page 354. Just write map of a subdivision, a plat of a subdivision filed with the clerk in the county where the land is located. There are other plat maps located in this book on page 341, 354, and another one on 370.
Got it.
So we've seen this one before, this plat map. This is a small subdivision with 8 properties, right? You see they made a cul-de-sac street. And if they give that street to the government, what do they call that? When you give land to the government for a public use, like streets, schools, and parks.
Easement or something? Or?
Dedication.
Yeah, dedication.
Easement is a right of way. When you have an easement, you don't own real estate. You only have a right to it. So look, the government here may have easements for, where is it? Here's a 12-foot easement for public utilities over here. You know, they don't own the property. The utility company just has a right to use your property. So surveys are done by licensed surveyors. These are experts in map making. We call that cartography, as well as they got to be, there's a lot of math involved for them for doing a lot of calculations too. So they're skilled at using these tools for measurement and map making. It's a very important job. People have gone to war over territory and land over the centuries, right? When surveys are used, conveying a portion of the lot, placing a mortgage, determining legal descriptions, or subdividing land, or for construction purposes, These are all times when surveys are needed or used. And it shows the location, dimensions of the parcel, and also shows the location, size, and shape of the buildings on the lot, as well as their elevation. So condominium descriptions, units reference the floor, elevation, and ceilings above the city datum. What is a datum? It's a point, line, or surface from which elevations are measured. And zero elevation is where? The mean sea level at New York Harbor. So large cities establish a local official datum. So they'll take that measurement from New York Harbor to them, and then they'll have a point at which all those local measurements are based from. And those benchmarks are those permanent local reference points that aid the surveyors that may state on them what that local elevation is. So highlight datum is a point, line, or surface from which elevations measured or indicated. And the datum is defined by the USGS as the mean sea level at New York Harbor. Then to aid surveyors, permanent reference points called benchmarks have been established throughout the United States. So that surveyor doesn't have to do their measurement all the way back to New York City to get the elevation and then work its way all the way back to whatever town in New Jersey it is that they're trying to measure. They base it off of a local benchmark rather than the actual measurement, which could be miles and miles away. Make sense?
Yes.
All right. So in wrapping it up, the benchmark is those local permanent markers that aid surveyors in their measurements, which may be based on those local markers rather than the actual benchmark, which could be miles away. The datum is that point where elevation is a measurement of elevation, and zero elevation is described as the mean sea level at New York Harbor. And a monument, these are those markers that the surveyor would bang the stakes at the corners of your property so that you could visually see where your property line is. So you know where to put up the shed. Make sure it doesn't go over onto your neighbor's property line. You know, I love it when you see these real estate agents where a buyer is asking them, they're like, where's the property line here? Is it where the fence is, or is it like where the bushes are, where you see the land kind of dips down like that? And then a real estate agent gets in there and they're all like, let me take a look. What the hell are you looking at? You know, unless you're lining up a couple of surveyor marks that are sticking out of the ground, it's impossible for you to tell where a property's boundaries are based on its contours or anything that's built there. The neighbor could have built that fence clear over the property line. Remember when chapter 7, where we showed that guy, he put a fence through the neighbor's pool and stuff because they built the garage and the pool halfway onto his property. So he put the fence where it belongs, right through the pool and the property. You know, so where something is built is not an indication of where the property line is. People screw up all the time. You know, so it's important to get these measurements. There's no way that you could visually see or take a guess like that. You know, that would be negligence on your behalf if you did such a thing. You should know better, and you should tell the buyer that the only way to tell for sure where the property line is to get a survey done. And then you can have that surveyor put the stakes in the ground, pay them that extra fee, so now you can visually see where it is. All right.
Victor,
Yes.
question.
Sure.
Like the title insurance, you told us that, you know, any defect, omission by title company, you are insured in the title. What about these surveyors, right? Because I mean, they could make a mistake too.
I guess they could.
So how do you protect yourself? I mean, if the surveyor puts the wrong benchmark, what happens then? Like in that case of the example you just mentioned.
I don't know. I hope they got insurance. I hope they got insurance. I'm sure
The
they.
title insurance will cover that title survey? Or we don't know. Okay.
Talk to your attorney.
Okay. Got it.
You know, yeah, these are the questions that a little bit beyond our scope here. You know, but yeah, I mean, we could reference the surveyor as the expert for doing the measurements and such. Could they screw up? Could they be off? Sure, they could. It depends what tools they're using too. If they're relying on these GPS tools, you know, GPS tools can be off a couple of feet. You know, I see there's several different surveyor tools out there now that help plot people's and map out people's properties and their areas of land. You know, could be in a city, it could be out in the middle of nowhere. All right, they could be off a bit. I've seen these measurements and how they get done, and these tools and how they get done. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to show those tools here in this class. But I found some newer tools and technology that came out that'll actually overlay like over a map, like a Google map, and it'll show you where you are on your cell phone, and you could visually see. It'll draw these lines, and you could use your cell phone to go over to where the property is. But how accurate are those? You know, it could be off a couple of feet here and there. Some are off a foot. Some are off 20 feet. That can make a big difference when measuring land and having your ownership of your property, right? So you really want to rely on a surveyor that maybe uses some of those old-fashioned tools, because that's really the more accurate way to do it. Those GPSs and stuff, they could be useful, but when it comes down to pinpointing accuracy, you know. Yeah, as far as the legal aspects of if they're wrong, I would assume that they have some sort of insurance on them. It's a question you'd have to ask them. I really don't know. So a deed is a written instrument where the owner of real estate intentionally conveys their right, like air rights or mineral rights, their title, that's their ownership, or their interest, which is a partial ownership in the real estate. That's what a deed is. It's a written instrument. Instrument, another fancy word for document, where an owner of real estate intentionally conveys their right, title, or interest, if a partial ownership, in a parcel of real estate. What is a parcel? It's a piece of land with legally defined boundaries. So basically, you had a surveyor measure it out. Now, the parties to a deed are the grantor, which is the owner who's selling the property, they're giving the land, and the grantee, they're the one that's acquiring the title. So remember, words that end in OR, the person's giving something, whatever the root word is. Words that end in EE is the one that's receiving it. So when you grant your ownership to somebody else, whether you're selling the land or giving it away or what have you, you're doing it by grant. So you're the grantor if you're the owner, and that's conveying that land, and then the grantee is the one who's receiving it. So the grantor has to sign the deed in order for it to be valid. The signature of the grantee, the buyer, is not required to make a deed valid. The deeds are still valid even if a buyer does not sign them. They have to be named in the deed, but they don't need to sign the deed. Not unless and until they decide they want to record it in the county's records. Then the deed needs to be signed and their signature acknowledged by like a notary. Deeds do not need to be dated. Why? Because, well, the buyer doesn't need to sign them. You know, the deeds transfer upon delivery and acceptance by the grantor. So when the seller signs the deed and hands it to the buyer, the moment that that buyer receives that deed, they became the owner of the property. It doesn't have to be recorded in the public records for you to officially be the owner. You're the owner the second that you receive that deed that names you as the buyer, as the new owner. And the seller signed and dated it or signed it and named you as the buyer in it. So deeds must be signed and dated and signatures acknowledged by all parties before they can be recorded in the public records. Deeds are valid even if not recorded in the public record. It is, however, in the buyer and the seller's best interest to ensure that it is recorded. You know, what if you have somebody who's unscrupulous? They sell you the property and give you a deed for the property in the morning, and then later in the afternoon, they do it to somebody else. Who's the owner? Now the race is on. Whoever records their interest in the public record first would be the actual owner. And then the other one has to find that fraudster that sold their property twice to two different people. All right. It's also in your best interest. Maybe it's not, maybe something like that's not going on. But what if I sold you my property? I'm the legitimate owner and I sold my property to you. And then I get sued. Somebody finds out that I'm listed as the owner still because you never recorded your interest. They see that I own real estate. If they get a judgment against me on that lawsuit, they could put a lien on the property that I'm recorded as the owner. So this is why it's in the buyer's best interest to make sure it's out of my name, the seller's name, and put into their name as expediently as possible. And as the seller, I would want to make sure that it's out of my name and in the new buyer's name as well. Because what if somebody trips and falls on the property? Who are they suing? Whoever's listed as the owner in the public record still, and that would still be me. You know, so it's in both parties' best interest to make sure that that property is recorded in the new owner's name. So there's 4 types of deeds commonly used in New Jersey that we're going to go over here. We got the full covenant and warranty deed, a bargain and sale deed with covenants against Grantors Act, the bargain and sale deed without any covenants, and a quitclaim deed. So let's highlight a deed is a written instrument by which an owner of real estate intentionally conveys their right, title, or interest in a parcel of real estate. The owner who sells or gives the land is referred to as the grantor, and the new owner who acquires title is called the grantee. Then I put the highlighted box around the 4 types of deeds. I put the word protection there with the arrow on each end. I wrote most to the top and least to the bottom. So the full covenant warranty deed offers the most protection, whereas the quitclaim deed offers the least protection. And then over here where it says bargain and sale deed with no covenants, a covenant is a legal promise. So that's why I wrote legal promise here next to covenants, the word covenant.
Hey, Victor, quick question.
Yeah.
What do you mean by protection?
We'll go over
Yeah.
that in just a moment. Just do these highlights first, and we're gonna get it. We're gonna get into it.
Got it. Thank you. Got it. We did it last time, so I think we're good.
Oh, you already got it. Okay. So once again, I have something similar. I have a slide similar to that right here, but I also show you what these deeds, other names that these deeds go by. Like the warranty deed also goes by full covenant and warranty deed or general warranty deed. You could hear it as. Then you have the bargain and sale CAG deed. That CAG stands for Covenants Against Grantors Act. Sometimes referred to as CVG, Covenants versus Grantors. You know, like, have you ever seen like lawsuit paperwork? It says this person against that person. And then sometimes it says this person versus that person. That's the only, it's the same document, just could be worded 2 different ways, against or versus, right? And it's also known as a special warranty or limited warranty deed. Then we have the bargain and sale deed without any covenants. There are no legal promises, whereas the bargain and sale CAG deed does have legal promises. And it's also known as the straight bargain and sale deed because there are no covenants that come with it. They're sometimes used in auctions called the sheriff's deed. So the sheriff's deed is just a straight bargain and sale deed. There's no covenants. The sheriff's department, when they have these auctions, they just say, we have the legal right to sell the property. We're not guaranteeing, there's no covenants, no legal promises we're making other than that we have the legal right to sell the property. We're not guaranteeing the quality of the title, that there's no other liens or encumbrances on the property. So there's no other legal promises we're making pertaining to the quality of the title other than we have the right to sell it. Because at a sheriff's auction, you could buy a property at an auction and there's still a tax lien on it, you know? That's why you got to do your due diligence before you ever buy the property. And then lastly, you got a quitclaim deed, which the person who signs a quitclaim deed, they don't even have to be the owner to the property. You could be, a quitclaim deed can just as effectively transfer ownership if the person who signs it has all the ownership rights. But by signing a quitclaim deed, you're not even saying that you have any interest in the property. Why would you do that? Well, coming up, we'll find out. So let's first examine, you were asking what kind of guarantees or what kind of protections are coming with these deeds. Well, let's go over the one first that offers the most protection, so maybe we'll get a little bit of a better understanding on this. So the full covenant and warranty deed, also known as a general warranty or just a warranty deed, provides the greatest protection of any deed. Well, what kind of protections are they offering? Well, this is on page 356. It has the covenant of seisin, where the grantor warrants that they're the owner of the property and they have the legal right to convey the title to it. You want to make sure that the person you're buying it from is the actual owner, right? Then you have the covenant against encumbrances. The grantor warrants that the property is free from any liens or other encumbrances and are willing to defend that fact. So an encumbrance is a claim by another or a liability against real estate, such as taxes or lawsuit judgments, liens, restrictive covenants, easements, licenses, etc., that may be on a property that could diminish its use or value of the property, which the grantee, the buyer, was not made aware of. The covenant of quiet enjoyment, guarantee that the title is good against any third parties that may step forward and may claim ownership rights to this property. Because at some point in the past, my grandpappy's grandpappy was swindled out of this property, you know, and if they could prove it and they got documentation for that, where do you stand if you're holding the deed as the owner and you're living in this house right now, and somebody steps forward and they claim that they're the rightful owner of the property because generations ago their family was swindled out of the property, and they could prove it, that there was an improper transfer or their relative never signed the deed. If they could prove that, then guess what? You got to give them the property because you're in possession of stolen property. There was an improper transfer done in the past. This is why it's important to get title insurance. Title insurance would try to research this the best it could and then insure you in the event that somebody can step forward and claim rights or ownership to the property and prove it. Then you're out of the property. Well, what about the money I paid for this property? What about the money I owe on the mortgage loan? Well, that's why you get title insurance. There's two types of title insurance that the attorney should order for you, and it would be the lender's policy and the buyer's policy. Lender's policy would pay off any balance owed to the lender, and the buyer's policy would pay back the buyer any money that they laid out. This is why the title company will do some research before they ever issue a title insurance policy to make sure that there were no improper transfers in the past before they're going to give you that kind of insurance. Because look, you can buy a property and you got title insurance, and then it finds out that there's just a lien on the property. Who's responsible for paying that lien? You are. But if you had a title search done, you got title insurance, well, the insurance company has to pay for it. They missed it. They got to pay it off. It's not your problem. That's why it's important for us to do this. And this is why we commonly get the title insurance in New Jersey. Then we have the covenant of further assurance that the grantor promises to obtain any instruments needed to make the title good, to produce any evidence in court to fight any adverse claims on the title. And then the covenant of warranty forever that states if the promises that were made in the warranty deed ever fail, the grantor will reimburse the grantee for any losses sustained. So instead of having title insurance, the seller who sold you the property will make you whole again. Okay, it sounds good on paper, but what if they're broke? Can't get blood from a stone. What if they're dead? They got no relatives. The state took all their property. Where do you stand now? Yeah. These covenants are not limited to matters that occurred during the time the grantor owned the property either. They extend back to all previous owners throughout history. That's a lofty claim to make, huh? I'm going to guarantee you the quality of the title, not just for the time that I own the property, that I did nothing to encumber it, but I'm going to guarantee you that throughout history, anybody who's ever owned property since we became the United States has never had an improper transfer, lien, or whatever that was improperly, where all the owners didn't sign off on the transfer of the ownership or what have you. That's a lofty claim to make. How could you make such a warranty and guarantee? This is why these are not as common in New Jersey. That's a very lofty claim to make, that I'm going to guarantee you the quality of the title, not just as long as I've owned the property, but throughout history, that anybody's owned the property before me, that there was never an improper transfer where all the owners didn't sign off. There was never any liens on a property that were not paid off throughout history, you know. And sometimes we get these people in these classes, especially these younger generation that hate the United States for some reason, that live here and they're citizens. They're like, oh, well, we stole that land. We stole it from the Indians. Can't they make a claim? No, because lands are conquered all the time throughout history. You could see the changing map through Europe and Asia before the United States ever existed. And then when the United States, before the United States even formed, when it was just Indian territory, you had Indian clans fighting against other Indian clans. They weren't just all peaceful people that were the perfect people either. You know, they fought wars against each other and battled for land, the most fertile hunting grounds, and and such. Throughout history, man has always been fighting wars for land and ownership. Doesn't matter what their background was. Plus, when we formed as the United States, we did not steal the land from nobody. We bought it. It was already stolen by France, and Spain conquered a lot of the land before we became the United States, and we just bought the land from France or Spain. Look at Alaska. We bought that from Russia. Right? I mean, that was the dumbest deal. Russia regretted that one. All right. So let's highlight the warranty deed, also known as the general warranty deed or full covenant warranty deed, provides the greatest protections of any deed. Now, you don't need to study seisin, encumbrances, quiet enjoyment, assurance, and warranty forever. You don't need to know what all the covenants are. You just need to know that the general warranty deed provides the greatest protection of any deeds. Now, while that sounds good on paper, once again, it's one thing to make that claim that you're going to make that buyer whole and protect it, but what if you make that claim and then you die, or you're broke? How are you going to reimburse me? Sounds good to say that, and you really mean it too. It's another thing if you actually have to protect it, that quality of the title. So most commonly used in New Jersey is the bargain and sale CAG, also known as a CVG type deed, or a special or limited warranty deed. With this type of deed, the owner is saying that as long as I've owned the property, I have done nothing to encumber it. I can't guarantee you anybody throughout history before me. For that, do your own due diligence, do a title search, and get title insurance. I'm only guaranteeing the quality of the title for as long as I have owned the property, that I have done nothing to encumber it. So this is the most common type of deed that's used in New Jersey. And then they also the buyer would buy title insurance. So they order a title search and get title insurance. This is the most common type of scenario where the owner just guarantees that as long as they've owned the property, they've done nothing to encumber it. For anybody that owned it before them, you have to do a title search and get that title insurance to protect you. So the grantor is willing to warrant or guarantee that they have done nothing to encumber the property while they owned it. There's no guarantees made about previous owners, and the current owner states that they've done nothing to encumber the property while it was in their possession only. This is sometimes called a special or limited warranty deed, as you could see why. You know, they're only guaranteeing the quality of the title for as long as they've owned it, not anybody before them. That's why we need to get that title search and title insurance done as well. So this is the most commonly used deed in New Jersey. So let's highlight under the bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors act, the grantor covenants that they have done nothing to encumber the property while it was in their possession. This is a normal type of deed that transfers ownership of property in New Jersey. And this is also known as a bargain and sale deed with covenants versus grantors or covenants against grantors, a special warranty or limited warranty deed. It goes by numerous names. Let me know when you got the highlights.
Got it.
And you can see there's a couple of blank deeds, copies of deeds printed here in the book, courtesy of Allstate Legal, which is that makes these forms. They're based right here, less than a mile away from me in Cranford. All right, and then we have the bargain and sale deed. You know, there is no CAG or CVG after that. It just says bargain and sale. No covenants against grantors. There's no covenants, period. It's just a straight bargain and sale deed that says that I have the legal right to sell the property, but I'm not guaranteeing you that there's no liens on the property or no encumbrances of any kind. Do your own due diligence for that. Do your own title search. So there's no express warranties as to the quality of the title, just merely that the grantor has the legal right to sell it. So the grantee, the buyer, has little recourse if defects later appear. So caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. That's how you pronounce that. It's not caveat emptor, it's caveat emptor. It's Latin, it means let the buyer beware. Do your own due diligence before you ever purchase a property. By the way, you need to know this term for state exam. Caveat emptor, it means let the buyer beware. And we'll probably highlight that, I think, in chapter 21. But in the meantime, a straight bargain and sale deed, let's highlight, contains no express warranties. However, it does imply that the grantor holds title to the property and therefore has the legal right to sell it. Okay.
A quick question on this one. So if you have a sheriff's deed and once you clean it up and have a title insurance, you improve your protection level then?
Well, the type of deed, the deed is the document used to transfer ownership. And the deed itself is just the type of deed that you use would dictate the liability of the seller and what they owe to the buyer, or what kind of promises they're making to the buyer. So you getting title insurance or whatever, doing title search, that only protects you in the event that something was not uncovered or something was missed, because we're all human and we did research, and the seller didn't make any guarantees. There's no covenants. There's no warranties on this type of deed other than I got the legal right to sell it. Now, if that wasn't true, well, then you could go after the seller. The insurance won't cover it. You go after the seller.
Well, maybe I didn't ask a question right. What I'm saying is, I bought the property at under a bargain and sell deed, let's say from the sheriff's office, as an investment property. Now I'm selling it to somebody else. Somebody else is not going to accept bargain and sell deed. They're going to be looking for the quality deed, the one that you mentioned before. The what we used in New Jersey.
Well, you could use any deed. What type of deed you choose to use now when selling it, it depends on what you choose to offer to potential buyers. You're not just handing them the deed that was given to you. That was how you obtain the property. Now, how the next person obtains the property depends on what type of deed you're offering to them. Do you feel confident to offer them a full warranty deed or a bargain and sale deed with covenants against grantors?
I see. Okay. So, because that's the norm. So if you have to offer that, since you receive bargain and sell deed with title insurance, you can cover yourself and take the risk of giving the bargain and sell with covenant deed.
Yeah, you don't have to offer any particular type of deed. It's whatever you choose to offer to the next buyer. What would they be more comfortable with getting? What do you feel more comfortable in offering? Can you prove? Do you feel good making a full warranty deed offering to somebody? That
And
no
time of
time ever
listing,
in history there was a improper transfer? I wouldn't do that. I just do I just make the guarantee that as long as I've owned it, so I obtained the property through a bargain and sale deed, right? And I'm going to make the guarantee that as long as I've owned it, I've done nothing to encumber it. Anybody else before me, do a title search and get title insurance.
got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then lastly, we have the type of deed that doesn't even make that claim that you're the owner or have any legal right or interest in the property. And this is called a quitclaim deed. Oh, why would anybody ever use this? Well, this provides the least amount of protection of any of the deeds. It carries no covenants or warranties whatsoever. It doesn't even imply the person that signs it has any ownership rights or interest in the property to begin with. Only the fact that they're giving up or quitting any claims that they may or may not have without saying if they do have any interest in the property. So it doesn't claim the grantor has any interest either. So therefore, if you get the ownership by somebody signing a quitclaim deed, if there's ever any liens, encumbrances, or anything on the property, you have no further recourse. Because they didn't make any claims to begin with. They just agreed to quit any claim to ownership of the property that they have without saying that they even have any. Kind of wacky, isn't it? So it's the most often used for simple transfers within a family, simple transfers of ownership within the family, or transferring property during divorce settlements, or to clear up clouds on a title. An example would be if there's a break in or gap in the chain of title when you're searching the title history and you can't link one owner to the next. You could get somebody to sign a quitclaim deed to give up their interest in that property. Or let's say you got a married couple that's selling the property, but only one of the people are listed as the owner of the property on the deed. When you bought the property, would you be okay with only one of the spouses signing it? Would you? If you're buying a property from a married couple, would you be okay with only one of the spouses signing it?
No.
Nope.
Well, only one of them is listed as the owner. So the spouse is like, well, she don't need to sign because I'm the one that's listed as the owner. I'm the only owner on it.
Yeah, but there are statutes that provides them that claim, right, for the spouse.
And what would that be?
I don't remember.
So depending on when were you married? That's the next question you should ask. Were you married after May 28, 1980 or before? Because you have the right of dower or courtesy, right? If you're
Yes, yes.
before May 28, 1980, your spouse does have an interest. But then again, even with that, you may not be sure because they're not showing you their marriage certificate and when they were married. So, you know what? Even though your spouse is not listed as the owner, I'd feel more comfortable buying this property if they signed a quitclaim deed. So this way, you claim that they don't have any interest in the property, and that may be true. So signing a quitclaim deed, giving up any interest without claiming that you have any interest in this property, would be a good way of making me feel comfortable. You see, this is why it could be used in situations where somebody doesn't even have an interest in the property, just to give up any claims. So if you have a buyer like this and they're like, well, I wouldn't feel comfortable buying the property without your spouse signing it, even though they're not listed as an owner, I want them to give up any interest they have in the property or any right to a claim of interest in the property. You say they have no interest in it, then it shouldn't be a problem them giving up the interest because they don't have any to begin with, right? Have them sign a quitclaim deed. Okay, so a quitclaim deed can be used for that purpose, or it can just as effectively transfer the ownership if that person has all the rights of ownership. You can just as effectively transfer ownership as with a full warranty deed by signing a quitclaim deed. If the seller has that interest at the time that they sign it. So let's highlight a quitclaim deed provides the grantee with the least protection of any deed. It provides no covenants or warranties and conveys only such interest, if any, the grantor may have when the deed is delivered. A quitclaim deed is commonly used for simple transfers within the family, for property transfer during divorce settlements. It can also be used to clear up clouds from a title. Remember, cloud in the title, think of a dark thunderstorm cloud hovering only over your house. That's an indication that there may be a problem with the ownership or a claim on the property or what have you. And the only way to clear that up, you want to clear that up, okay? And it could be cleared up with a simple somebody getting to sign a quitclaim deed, giving up any interest, that they have no further claim on the property. Okay, so that's why I wrote here, a quitclaim deed can transfer ownership just as effectively as a full warranty deed if the grantor has good title and the interest in the property when they sold it, when they sign it. We all good?
Yep.
Got it.
So now let's look over the anatomy of any deed. We went over the 4 types of deeds and when you should use them and what kind of interest each one would be conveying or protections that they would be conveying. Now let's go look over the anatomy of any deed. You have to have a grantor with legal capacity to sign it. They got to be of sound mind and legal age, right? Like any contract. The grantee is the buyer. They need to be named in that deed that they're the one that's going to be taking the ownership interest. They need to be named in the deed because they're not required to sign the deed. Okay, so you have to name who you're giving the ownership to when you're the seller and you're signing a deed. The consideration is the full purchase price needs to be specified. Then you have the granting clause, which is the heart of the deed. It's the meat and potatoes of any deed, and we'll go over what that means in a moment. And then we have the habendum clause, which always follows the granting clause. It begins with the words to have and to hold and specifies what, if any, other additional details that need to be explained in the deed. And then we have a legal description of the real estate, which we went over. We just went over. What are the 3 legal descriptions of land? Meets and bounds, government survey, and a plat map. An address to your property or a lot and block number. While they may be helpful and useful in describing what we're talking about, they're not considered legal descriptions of land. Only a survey from a competent surveyor with meets and bounds, government survey, or a plat map are the 3 legal descriptions of land that must be specified. So that's where I got this from in this little list. So let's highlight underneath it. Deeds do not need to be dated in order to be valid. And also right there, or signed by buyer unless they want to record it or until they want to record it. So, and then their signature needs to be acknowledged as well. So deeds do not need to be signed by the buyer unless they're going to record the document. And then their signatures also need to be acknowledged by an attorney, a notary, a judge, or some other trusted person like an elected politician. Trusted person, right? Let me know when you have these notes and highlights down.
Got it. Got it.
Got it.
Okay. So here's my explanation of the anatomy of the deed. You may want to snap a picture of this one. I do a pretty good job explaining it if I don't tap myself on my own back here a little bit. The grantor is the seller. They need to be at least 18 years of age in order to effectively convey land or real estate, or the contract may be voidable by the minor. And they must have legal capacity to sign and execute that deed. They got to be sound mind and legal age. Then the grantee is the buyer, who must be named so that they could be identified with reasonable certainty, and they need to be named in that deed. The consideration needs to be spelled out. What is consideration? Remember, there are 3 legal forms of consideration. So consideration is what the parties give or receive from each other for any contract to be valid. So the consideration can be something of value, or an exchange of goods, or it could be legal tender. That's money or a mortgage loan, or love and affection. But if it is love and affection, it should be accompanied by an affidavit. An affidavit is a sworn statement that says that this is, in fact, a gift. Then the granting clause is the heart of any deed. It explains what exactly is being transferred here. Are we transferring the title, the ownership of the property? Or are we just transferring somebody's rights or partial ownership interest in a property? So how the new owner is, it also describes how the new owner is taking the ownership. Is it going to be in severalty, in common, as joint tenants, or tenants by the entirety? Remember, we went over those different forms of ownership. Tenancy in severalty is a sole ownership by one person or entity. Tenancy in common is ownership by 2 or more people not married to each other, 2 or more people or corporations. Joint tenancy, you have to specify you want to take ownership in this form. Otherwise, the default form of ownership by 2 or more people is a tenancy in common, unless you specify otherwise in the deed that you wish to take ownership as joint tenants. And what's the only benefit of joint tenancy? It's the right of survivorship. And then we have another type of ownership that also has the right of survivorship, but this is between married couples. It's tenancy by the entirety. And then the habendum clause should not, it follows the granting clause and it should not contradict it. It should just clarify any terms that need further clarification. Like if you and I buy a property together and you put up 75% of the cash and I put up only 25% of the cash, unless we specify otherwise, we're 50-50 owners on that property. You would need to specify this in the habendum clause that there is a different percentage of ownership. Now, the habendum clause cannot contradict anything that is in the granting clause. It's only there to add things that would support as evidence further clarification, like the percentage of ownership. Or if there's several owners, or if you're going to name a remainder man, depending on the types of estate that you got there. If you're naming a remainder man, like if it's a life estate, is the property coming back to me? Because if it's a life estate, you don't need to specify. Upon your death, the ownership reverts back to me because I'm the one that gave it to you. But I could name somebody else to be a remainder man to get the ownership interest on your death. It could go to someone else. And I could still be alive. It doesn't have anything to do with me and my life. Because if I die and I didn't name anybody as a remainder man, it would come back to me. But if I'm dead, who inherits my interest? Anybody, any of my natural heirs or somebody who I named in a will, right? A remainder man is somebody else that I could name. It doesn't have to have anything to do with my life. I could still be alive and just name that when you die, if I give you a life estate, instead of the property reverting back to me, it's going to go to somebody else. That's what a remainder man is. It's a third party named in a document to be a beneficiary, if you recall. See, now all these things that we've learned throughout this book, we're putting together in the final deed and the transfer of that ownership. And then the description of the real estate. We learned about the three legal forms of ownership or descriptions of land in this chapter: the meets and bounds, the rectangular or government survey, which we do not use here in New Jersey, or a plat map, which is a map of a subdivision recorded in the county where the land is located. So although lot and block numbers and addresses are helpful in describing the property, they are not considered legal descriptions, and you need to know that for exam. And then any exceptions or reservations, because you could put restrictions in the deed on how somebody, a future owner, can use a property to limit their use or to limit what they could build there. Like if you want to say that they cannot subdivide the land to be any smaller than a certain size, even though local regulations for zoning laws may allow it, if you put a restriction in the deed that disallows it, which rule do you follow? The more restrictive rule will always prevail. So the restriction that I put in the deed as the seller, you'd have to follow that one. And what do we call restrictions placed in deeds by private parties? We call them restrictive covenants. A covenant is a legal promise that you agree to abide by. And these are found in fee determinable, defeasible fee, or conditional fee estates. And we went over that in chapter 6 on page 104. And then we have the signature of the grantor. The seller needs to sign the deed in order to make it valid. So they must sign that deed, and the buyer's signature and date are only required if they're going to be recording it in the public record. So the buyer's signature is not required for a deed to be valid, because when does the transfer of ownership take place? Upon the delivery and acceptance of the deed itself, which only needs to be signed by the by the seller, and the buyer needs to be named in the deed. And then anybody's signature needs to be acknowledged. So what is an acknowledgement? It provides evidence that the signatures are genuine and the person who signs it is the actual person that was named there. the purpose is to prevent forgeries. So this is either usually witnessed by a notary, a judge, an attorney, or an elected official can acknowledge documents. So that's another term you need to know, acknowledgement. What is an acknowledgement? It's just a verification by a competent party that, like a notary, judge, attorney, or elected official, that confirms that they know you, or they check your ID to verify who you are when signing a document. That's it. So you see how this slide, it has some pretty clear, straightforward explanations, a little bit better than what the book offers. So we'll see what the book offers right now as we do the highlights and notes. All right. So requirements to convey that property, as explained on that previous slide, any exceptions or reservations affecting the title, the signature of the grantor, and an acknowledgement. Delivery and acceptance, implied delivery and acceptance is also possible. Transfer of ownership takes place upon delivery and acceptance of the deed itself. Now, deeds do not need to be dated because the transfer of ownership takes place upon delivery and acceptance of the actual deed. When delivered and accepted, the owner is said to have seized the land, and that ownership transfers at that very moment. That's why they don't need to be dated. Simply when I hand you the deed, that's when you become the owner. All right, so affidavit is a sworn statement. Let's highlight that on page 362. That's at the bottom of page 362. An affidavit is a sworn statement. Yeah, one of those things we were talking about in order for a deed to be valid as well, just like any contract, in order for any contract to be valid, there has to be some form of consideration given or received between the parties. So to be valid, a deed must contain a clause acknowledging that the grantors received receipt of something from that buyer as consideration. And consideration is defined as something of value offered by one party and accepted by another to induce them to perform or refrain from performing some act. Consideration must be good and valuable between the parties, as long as it's legal, right? You can't have consideration that you give me the property and I'll kill this guy for you, because murder is illegal, right? So the consideration, whatever the parties are doing for each other or giving to each other, has to be legal. If you do this for me, I'll give you a lot of drugs, okay? You can't do that because the drugs could be illegal, right? So we got the habendum clause. Further clarifies the terms stated in the granting clause, like percentage of ownership or naming a remainder man. And then highlight the habendum clause, follows the granting clause, and the habendum clause begins with the words to have and to hold. The book's definition does not give you enough. You should write this here. Further clarifies terms stated in the granting clause, like percentage of ownership or naming a remainder man. That's what that says right there. By the way, when I'm switching between the windows, my windows are not switching on your screen, are they? What are you guys seeing on your screen right now?
Yeah, we see the copy of the page. It's not switching for us.
What page are you seeing right now?
It's 363 from the book that we are highlighting.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure because I'm switching between the slides so I could make edits on some slides, you know. I just want to make sure that I'm not, what you're seeing is not switching on your screen, on your end, you know.
Okay.
All right. So all I did is I went back and I highlighted this consideration, what the explanation of consideration is too from the previous slide. You guys don't necessarily need to do that, especially if you highlighted my, if you took a picture of this slide to study, you know, consideration. I got the full explanation there. But in the book, that would be something to highlight, just an explanation and understanding what consideration is. And then the habendum clause. Habendum clause, that's always a question that you'll see on exam about the habendum clause. You need to know what it is. Sometimes it's a stupid question that just points out that you need to know the habendum clause begins with the words to have and to hold. That doesn't tell you what it is or what it does, though. See, I give you a further explanation that it further clarifies terms stated in the granting clause, like the percentage of ownership or naming a remainder man. See, they tell you when it's necessary to define or explain the ownership to be enjoyed by the grantee. Okay, but that doesn't really tell you exactly what it does. If this is a little clearer, it further clarifies the terms that were stated in the granting clause, like the percentage of ownership, if it's going to be anything other than 50-50 equal split, or naming a remainder man. There has to be a description of the real estate, meets and bounds, government survey, or a plat map as defined on page 351. So I just said, see page 51 here, 351. And any exceptions and reservations, which we call restrictive covenants that we add to deeds. And then we wrote down here, fee determinable, defeasible fee, and conditional fee estate. Those are the types of estates and land that are ownership forever, but based on a restriction. And who can place restrictions in deeds? Only private parties. Governments do not place restrictions in deeds. They've got their own powers that could limit how you could use your property. Right?
Got it.
Got it.
All right. And then we have the signature of the grantor, the seller. The seller would sign the deed. The buyer's signature is not required, not unless and until they're going to record the document in the public records, but they're not required to. So that's why only the signature of the seller is required for a deed to be valid. And that's also why dates do not need to be included in deeds, because when does transfer of ownership take place? Upon delivery and acceptance of the deed itself. So to be valid, a deed must be signed by all the grantors named on the deed. The grantor's signature may be signed by an attorney in fact, acting under a power of attorney. See, this is very interesting. What if the person's not going to be around and they're going to give somebody else the power of attorney to sign the document on their behalf? Now the buyer records this in the public records, and at some future date, somebody's doing a title search and they see that the seller is not the one who signed the deed. That could be an indication that there's a cloud on the title, that there was an improper transfer of ownership because somebody other than the seller actually signed the deed. This is why it's very important that if a seller gives somebody the power of attorney to sign the deed on their behalf, they also need to record the power of attorney in the public records, as well as an acknowledgement after the date that was signed. The acknowledgement would state that the seller has appeared before them today, proving that they're still alive. Because a power of attorney is only effective while somebody's alive who granted you that power of attorney. If they're dead, you can't still be signing on someone's behalf that gave you a power of attorney if they're already dead. So if they just showed up before a notary and the notary says, this person has appeared before me today and provided their sufficient ID. Boom, that's all you need to show that they were still alive. And then that gets recorded in the public records as well. So now, if there's ever a title search done in the future, these additional things these additional complications where somebody was given a power of attorney to sign on someone else's behalf, now you need to record that power of attorney and then later on also record an acknowledgement that the seller was still alive at the time that that other person signed according to the powers that were given to them in the power of attorney. Make sense? That's what this whole thing is explaining right here about the signature of the grantor. It says to be valid, a deed must be signed by all the grantors named in the deed, and a grantor's signature may be signed by an attorney in fact, acting under a power of attorney. That's that specific written authority that's given to them to act on someone else's behalf. An attorney in fact is a person who has been given a power of attorney to execute and sign legal documents or instruments for a grantor. In such cases, it's usually necessary for the power of attorney to be recorded in the county where the property is located. And because the power of attorney terminates on the death of the person granting such authority, evidence must be submitted that the grantor is still alive at the time the attorney in fact signs the deed. And this can be done simply by having the seller appear before a notary at any date after that date where it was signed, the document was signed. So it acknowledges that they're, if you show up and you before a notary the day after the person you gave a power of attorney to signs a document, well, then it shows that you were still alive, right? Because you appeared before them. That's all it's needed. And that's all that explains. Interesting though, right? How we got to prove these steps. Now, an acknowledgement, nod your head if you can hear me. That's an acknowledgement, right? It's some kind of a verification. And the purpose of this is just to prevent forgeries. So now an acknowledgement is basically before somebody, in order to record a document, their signatures need to be acknowledged, meaning that at the time they signed that document, they signed it in front of a notary, an attorney, a judge, or an elected official who knows who you are or who had verified who you are by checking your ID. And the purpose is simply to prevent forgeries of documents. So an acknowledgement, let's highlight, is a declaration made by a person signing a document before a notary public or authorized public officer. The acknowledgement provides evidence that the signature is genuine, the purpose to prevent forgeries. An acknowledgement is not required to make a deed valid, though. In New Jersey, all deeds, mortgages, and similar documents must be acknowledged, though, before they can be recorded and added to the public records. So this is interesting. They say, from a purely practical point of view, a deed that is not acknowledged is not a satisfactory instrument. Although an unrecorded deed is still valid between the grantor and the grantee, it does not protect against claims by subsequent innocent purchasers. To help assure good title, a grantee should always require acknowledgement of the grantor's signature on the deed so that it may be recorded. So they can't say in the future that the owner never really signed the document. Prove that it was me that signed it. Well, you do that with an acknowledgement. That's why we usually do this at a closing table with an attorney sitting there, or a notary. Okay. Now, delivery and acceptance. I told you, ownership transfers upon delivery and acceptance of the actual document, the deed itself. So before the transfer of title by conveyance can take effect, delivery and acceptance must exist. There has to be an actual delivery of the deed by the grantor and either an actual or implied acceptance by the grantee, the buyer. Highlight, title said to pass when the deed is delivered. When it's actually handed to that buyer. So the effective date of the transfer of title from the grantor to the grantee is the date of the delivery of the document itself when they put it in your hand. That's why they don't need to have a date on the document itself, because the transfer of ownership doesn't take place until they actually hand it to you. Now, this is a little story down here. You don't need to highlight it or do anything. I just like to read this out to people. I'm going to make a little cartoon about this too. You guys remember those after-school specials, those PSA, public service announcements they used to have? Like when I was younger, they used to have these commercials on TV when I got out of school. They were like little cartoons for kids. They, conjunction, junction, what's your function? They teach people about the kids about the language and stuff. They teach them about, there was that cartoon, what is a bill? It teaches people, how laws get passed, and it was named The Bill. It was a little cartoon of a bill explaining how laws are passed and how legislature works to kids through a cartoon. This was called Schoolhouse Rock. If you guys recall this at all, you can look it up on YouTube and watch some of those Schoolhouse Rock PSA, public service announcements. What is a bill? Conjunction, junction. They had a lot of others. Well, think of those little cheesy cartoon characters when I read this story to you, and close your eyes and just listen to the story that describes how the transfer of ownership took place in the Middle Ages when people were illiterate. That means they didn't know how to read or write. How can you transfer the ownership of real estate if it's not on a piece of paper? Because people don't know how to read or write. Well, back in the Middle Ages, only the rich were educated and knew how to read or write. Everybody else was a laborer, working for kings and queens, right? So let's close our eyes and just listen to this little story and just picture these little cartoon characters as I read the story to you, okay? I'm going to do it in my little Schoolhouse Rock type voice here. So let me give you that. In England during the Middle Ages, when few people were literate, transfer of title occurred in the following manner. The seller took the buyer to the field in question and they walked the boundaries. This was known as the beating of the bounds. Then the seller reached down and they took a clod of that earth that represented the whole field and they handed it to the buyer. At the moment when the buyer seized that clod, they became the owner of the land. Today, a document is used instead of a clod of earth, but titles still said to transfer at the moment of delivery and acceptance, and the owner still said to be seized of the property. The word season still denotes ownership and control today. Like the way I read that, it's a just picture that the little cheesy cartoon characters walking around the boundaries. I'm showing you where the property line is. Then I pick up a piece of the dirt and I hand it to you. And the moment you're seized of the land, I put the dirt in your hand. That's how I transferred the ownership to you. I gave you the land. I actually physically gave you the land. I put some of that dirt from the land in your hand, and you became the owner. But how do you prove that? So over time, people had to get educated. Things need to be put in writing because it's, this is why there was a lot of wars fought. People could just bully you around and push you and say, no, I'm the owner of the land. Prove that you got the dirt in your hand. Well, I still got it over there. Well, I got a clod of dirt too. So as you can see, that could cause problems. But we still use these terms season today. That means you're in control of the land. You've seized the property. All right. So how do execution of corporate deeds get done? Well, by the board of directors. Board of directors make all the decisions on behalf of corporations. They're the hopefully making their decisions on behalf of and looking out for their stockholders. Best interest, hopefully. So highlight, a corporation can convey real estate only upon a proper resolution passed by its board of directors. All right. So you don't have to get all the stockholders to vote to when General Motors wants to sell one of their plants and shut down a plant or buy and open a new one. Any major financial decision like that is made by its board of directors. It's not done by the CEO unilaterally all on their own. The board of directors, it needs major decisions like that need to be run by the board of directors, who should be looking out for their investors' financial best interest. And so they would analyze the situation and make a decision there. So, and then they would vote on it and they would pass a resolution, which would then solidify that. All right. And that concludes chapter 19. So let's do the key terms to review for chapter 19. There are 2. Are you ready?
Yes.
Then let's do this, shall we? So, one who receives property through a deed.
Grantee.
Grantee, 9 is A. A deed implying that the grantor owns the property. But nothing more.
Acknowledgement.
Bargain and sell deed. No.
Yeah, bargain and sale deed. I'm sorry. 2 is B. Bargain and sale deed. That's the type of deed that implies the grantor owns the property, but nothing more. It's like a sheriff's sale. They have the right to sell the property, but they're not guaranteeing the quality of the title. 2 is B. Actions that actually transfer title.
Deed.
No, the actions.
Delivery and acceptance.
Delivery and acceptance of the deed, right? That little story I just read. 8 is C. A clause in a deed that actually makes the transfer.
The granting clause.
The granting clause. 10 is D. A legal promise.
Covenant.
Is a covenant. 5 is E. A document used to transfer title to a parcel of real property.
That's a deed.
7 is F, the deed. The mean sea level at New York Harbor, also local 0 elevation.
Datum.
6 is G, the datum. A deed stating that the grantor has not encumbered the property, as long as they've owned the property.
Bargain and sell CAG or
Correct. 3 is H. A declaration to a notary or other official to prevent forgeries.
Acknowledgement.
It's an
Acknowledgement.
acknowledgement. 1 is I. And a marker placed by the U.S. Geological Survey stating elevation. What do we call that marker?
Benchmark.
It's a benchmark. 4 is J. Yeah, a lot of things that a lot of terms, definitions, that this class is mostly consisting of. There are some laws, there's some math and some theory, but the majority of this is terms and definitions like this. A spot at which meets and bounds description begins and ends.
Point of beginning.
The POB, or point of beginning. 6 is A. Fixed natural or man-made objects identifying boundaries in a meets and bounds description.
Monuments.
They're called monuments. 5 is B. One who transfers title by signing a deed.
Grantor.
The grantor, they're granting their ownership, right? 1 is C. A description sufficient to identify a parcel that is accepted by a court of law.
Legal
Legal
description.
A
description.
legal description. 3 is D. To have and to hold clause that explains ownership that is being transferred.
Abandon clause.
Abandon.
Habendum clause. I like to mispronounce this one to remember it a little bit better like that, because usually there's a stupid question on exams about relating the have and to hold clause begins with the words to have and to hold. So I just mispronounce it. I say the have been to hold clause is the habendum clause. Habendum, have been to hold. Habendum, have been to hold clause. So that's the way I kind of relate them, so you can't forget it. 2 is E. A deed providing the grantee with the most protection of any deed.
Warranty deed.
The warranty deed, also known as a full covenant and warranty deed or general warranty deed. Yes. 9 is F. System for land description used in Western states.
Rectangular survey system.
The rectangular or governmental survey, sometimes also even known as the public land survey system. 8 is G, correct. A deed releasing any interest grantor may have without claiming season.
Quitclaim deed.
7 is H, that would be the quitclaim deed. And a description using boundaries and direction.
Meets and bounds.
Bounds.
Meets and bounds, because meets, meters, that's a measurement of distance, and bounds, the boundaries, the direction. Meets and bounds, the distance and direction around a property. So 4 is I. And that concludes chapter 19.